Imagine moving into a smart house that slowly realizes what makes you angry.
Right, like it's studying you.
Yeah, exactly. And then it starts locking you in rooms just to keep you enraged.
It's a terrifying thought.
It really is. But now, imagine that house is actually your phone, and you spent the entire 2010s building it.
Brick by digital brick.
Exactly. Welcome to the deep dive. I am incredibly pumped you are joining us today because we are looking at a highly analytical, just completely fascinating document.
It's titled simply 2010's.pdf.
Right. And our mission for this conversation is massive. We are going to unpack the decade that fundamentally rewired what it means to be a human being.
We are talking about the 2010s, obviously.
And just to set the table right away, this is not a nostalgic look back at, early meme culture.
Or a tech blog timeline of when different smartphone models dropped.
No, this is a psychological autopsy. We want to understand how the reality you are sitting in right now was actually built.
And the lens used to analyze this era is totally unique.
Okay, let's unpack this. Because the author uses this cast of psychological archetypes, right?
Yes, these subpersonalities that live inside all of our heads. It uses them to explain how the human brain reacted to the sheer unprecedented chaos of that decade.
It is a phenomenal framing device, and it gets right to the baseline thesis we have to establish.
Which is that the 2010s were not just about the invention of new tools. I mean, humanity has always invented tools.
Right, the printing press, the telegraph, the television.
Exactly, those were tools.
Yeah.
But the 2010s represent a total transition. It was the decade where technology ceased to be a tool that you pick up, use, and put down.
It became the environment you live inside.
It became the atmosphere. We moved from using the internet to inhabiting it.
You just cannot overstate the psychological impact of migrating an entire species into a digital environment.
It's a complete paradigm shift.
But to understand the house we live in now, we have to look at the foundation it was built on.
You can't just drop into 2010 and you understand what's happening.
Right. We have to look at the incredible, often terrifying momentum we inherited from the 2000s.
The source material describes the 2000s as a decade where the ground shifts beneath you.
It wasn't about curated digital identities yet. It was about massive, real-world disruption.
Talk to me about what that ground shifting actually looked like. Because looking back, the 2000s delivered a series of structural shocks to the human nervous system.
Shocks that we never really recovered from.
That is the crucial context here. The 2000s were defined by violent structural shocks that fundamentally altered our baseline of safety.
Safety, trust, predictability, all of it.
If we look at the geopolitical shocks first, the decade essentially opens with the September 11th attacks.
Right. That single morning completely rewrites the global psychological baseline.
Before that, for much of the West in the 90s, fear was episodic. It was something that happened to you occasionally.
A discrete event.
After 9/11, fear becomes ambient. It becomes a low, persistent hum in the background of everyday life.
You see this manifest physically, right? The sudden, jarring visibility of security theater at airports.
The massive expansion of state surveillance. And the U.S. entering these incredibly long, grinding, ambiguous wars in Afghanistan and Iraq.
It's an era where danger feels ever present.
Amorphous and invisible.
I mean, think about it. You're watching reality TV, but there's a literal color-coded terror threat level scrolling at the bottom of the screen.
The quiet moment suddenly felt suspicious.
Exactly. And then, just as people are somewhat adapting to that geopolitical anxiety, the floor drops out economically.
Toward the end of the decade, you get the catastrophic economic fracture of the 2008 financial crisis.
Suddenly, the institutions that were supposed to be the absolute bedrock of adult life, they crumble.
Massive legacy banks, the housing market, the entire assumed trajectory of the American dream. All of it fractures simultaneously.
Millions of jobs disappear. Generational wealth evaporates overnight.
And the basic unspoken promise of societal stability feels entirely negotiable.
If you worked hard and bought a house, you were supposed to be safe.
2008 proved that you weren't.
So the fundamental promises of modern society are essentially up for debate.
And while all of this heavy, terrifying stuff is happening in the physical world, there is this other massive shift quietly happening in the background.
The emergence of the early digital self.
The analysis describes the 2000s as a purely transitional phase. We were living in two completely distinct, fragmented worlds.
You had your offline world, you went to physical malls, you watched scheduled cable TV, you bought CDs.
You talked face to face.
Right. And then you had this parallel early online world. You're logging into AOL Instant Messenger.
You're agonizing over your MySpace top 8. You're poking people on early Facebook.
Information was suddenly becoming abundant, but it wasn't seamless yet.
It wasn't in your pocket at every waking second. The physical friction is what defined that era.
Going online was actual activity.
You had to physically walk over to a desk, sit down at a desktop computer, and wait for a connection.
It had a start point and an end point.
When you walked away from the desk, you were offline.
But even in that fragmented state, the foundational concrete of our modern identity was being poured.
And this is where the psychological framework of the subpersonalities becomes so illuminating.
The author brilliantly illustrates how different facets of human psychology were being activated by these dual shocks.
The physical instability on one hand, and the digital emergence on the other.
For instance, to capture the reaction to the physical shocks, the analysis introduces the archetypes of Devon and Kenny.
Let's define those for everyone listening, because they run through this entire autopsy.
Devon is described as having this quiet tension, a controlled aggression, an emotional withdrawal.
It's the psychological embodiment of that ambient danger we just talked about.
A sense that you can't ever truly relax because you don't trust the quiet.
And then there's Kenny. Kenny is the tribal protector.
It's the part of our brain that says, okay, the world is fundamentally dangerous.
The banks might collapse, the airports aren't safe, so I need to tightly protect what matters.
I need to be highly skeptical of outsiders and fiercely loyal to my immediate in-group.
Precisely. Devon and Kenny represent the hardening of the human psyche, a collective, defensive crouch.
In response to 9/11 and the financial collapse, we were becoming more fearful and more tribal.
But simultaneously, the nascent digital world is activating entirely different, almost contradictory archetypes within us.
Here we meet Tommy and Liz.
Tommy represents the builder. This is the incredible, wide-eyed optimism of the early internet.
Suddenly, endless creation tools are democratized and available.
You can write code, you can edit video, you can record music in your bedroom and upload it globally.
The DIY culture explodes. It's the empowering realization that you can build almost anything.
And right next to Tommy is Liz. Liz represents the sudden, intoxicating realization that you, yourself, are now a curated, searchable profile.
Attention is slowly becoming a currency.
And your social status is becoming highly performative.
You aren't just a person moving through the physical world anymore. You are a brand that can be discovered, optimized, and consumed.
Okay, I want to try an analogy here to see if I'm tracking the mechanics of this.
Go for it.
If the 2000s were an earthquake that cracked the foundation of how we lived.
Our trust in institutions, our economic safety.
Right. If the 2000s were the earthquake, then the 2010s were the tsunami that washed over the ruins.
I love that analogy. But let me stop you right there and push back on the premise a little bit.
Okay, push back.
Wasn't the early internet of the 2000s, the era of the Tommy archetype, inherently and deeply optimistic?
It definitely felt that way.
Right, like when we were all setting up those early profiles, writing blogs, searching Wikipedia, we really thought we were just building a giant global public library.
We thought we were democratizing human knowledge.
Exactly. I don't think anyone logging on to early Facebook thought they were building a global, hyper-anxious popularity contest.
Or a tribal battleground.
Right. We thought it was just a really cool new tool.
It absolutely looked that way on the surface.
Yeah.
And that optimism is exactly what blinded us to the infrastructure being laid down.
Your analogy of the earthquake and the tsunami is evocative, but let's look at the underlying architecture.
The 2000s internet was democratizing, yes. But what the data points to is that the 2000s didn't actually resolve any of the fundamental human tensions.
The tensions created by the wars and the economic crash.
Right. It merely set the stage for them to be weaponized and amplified.
The builders, the Tommies of the world, were writing code that allowed for massive connection.
But they were also, perhaps unwittingly, building the traps. They just hadn't baited them yet.
Wow. So by the end of the 2000s, you have a population that is deeply anxious.
Highly tribal thanks to the Kenny archetype.
Newly performative thanks to the Liz archetype.
And largely distrustful of traditional authority.
The 2010s simply arrived and asked a very dangerous question.
What happens when you take this specific, highly fragile, anxious, psychological state, remove the physical friction of the desktop computer,
And put the internet into everyone's pocket, 24 hours a day, 7 days a week.
and that question pulls us directly into the heart of the Great Rewiring.
The moment when technology stopped being a destination and became the environment, the air we breathe.
And the catalyst for this, obviously, the object that changed the trajectory of the human species, is the smartphone.
It is the defining structural fact of the decade.
The adoption data is just staggering when you zoom out and look at the timeline.
In 2011, smartphone ownership in the United States was sitting at roughly 35%.
It was common, sure, but it wasn't universal. It was still viewed by many as somewhat of a luxury item.
Or a specific tool for business professionals, the era of the BlackBerry.
By 2019, just 8 years later, that number surged to 81%.
Wait, 35 to 81% in just 8 years?
Yes, and effectively 100% for anyone under the age of 50.
In less than a decade, this piece of glass and metal became the default mandatory interface for modern human life.
It completely ceased to be a communication device. It became total, unavoidable infrastructure.
It swallowed the physical world. It absorbed your wallet, your physical map, your newspaper,
Your point-and-shoot camera, your private diary, your connection to your family.
your banking, and most crucially, it became your primary, always accessible distraction machine.
Right, think about the physical weight of what we used to carry versus the psychological weight of what replaced it.
You used to leave the house with a set of keys, a bulky leather wallet,
Maybe a printed MapQuest sheet if you're driving somewhere new.
a paperback book, maybe an iPod. The smartphone absorbed all of those tangible, single-purpose physical objects into one glowing rectangle.
But the hardware, the glass and the silicon, that's only half the story.
The real rewiring, the invisible rewiring that actually changed how our brains function, was happening in the software.
And this brings us to the algorithmic engine.
The platforms we all know, YouTube, Twitter, Facebook, eventually TikTok.
They underwent a massive fundamental structural change in the early 2010s. They transitioned from chronological feeds to optimization systems.
And this is perhaps the single most critical turning point in the history of human communication.
In the early days, if you logged onto a social platform, you saw what your friends posted, exactly in the order they posted it.
It was a chronological timeline. If no one posted, the feed ended, you saw it all, and then you logged off.
But in the 2010s, these platforms realized that chronological feeds have a natural endpoint.
Which limits how many ads they can show you.
So they changed the architecture. They ceased to be neutral public squares and became highly sophisticated, opaque optimization systems.
Designed with one singular, ruthless goal: to maximize engagement.
To increase time on site.
And here is the vital mechanism to understand. These algorithms do not optimize for truth.
They do not optimize for your psychological well-being.
They do not optimize for a healthy, functioning democracy or civic harmony.
They optimize strictly for reaction.
The algorithms learn to rigorously measure every micro-interaction, what you click, what you watch.
How many milliseconds you linger on a specific photo.
What makes you type an angry comment, what makes you laugh.
Once it builds that profile, it feeds you more of it.
But crucially, it feeds you slightly more intense, more extreme versions of it over time.
Because human tolerance builds, and it needs to keep you scrolling.
And what does that actually do to us? Because the analysis uses this phrase, reality tunnels.
It sounds like something out of a sci-fi novel.
But it feels incredibly real.
It is entirely real. And it is the mechanism driving so much of our current cultural fracturing.
Because the algorithm is customizing the input for every single individual brain, it creates reality tunnels.
Let's ground this in a very specific scenario. Imagine a Thanksgiving dinner in 2017.
Okay, setting the scene.
You have two people sitting across from each other at the same table, living in the same town.
But because of their phones, they're inhabiting completely different sets of facts.
Completely different political priorities and entirely different emotional worlds.
One person's feed has learned that they engage with fear.
So their digital environment is a world constantly on the verge of chaotic, violent collapse.
Filled with daily videos of crime, institutional corruption, and cultural decay.
The person sitting across from them has a feed that knows they engage with righteous indignation.
Their digital environment is a world defined exclusively by systemic injustice, impending climate doom, and political malice.
Both people are being agitated. Both feel their reality is the absolute, undeniable truth.
Because they see thousands of posts confirming it every day.
But they're completely different realities, curated specifically to hold their unique individual attention.
It's bespoke agitation. It's an algorithm custom tailoring a reality that perfectly triggers your specific anxieties.
And speaking of specific triggers, there's this detail in the analysis that I found absolutely fascinating.
We have to talk about the like button.
It's such a tiny, seemingly innocuous design feature.
It was originally introduced, I believe, around 2009, simply as a way to quickly acknowledge a friend's post.
Without having to type out a generic cool or congratulations in the comments.
But over the course of the 2010s, this tiny piece of code mutated into an actual measurable psychological currency.
It literally quantified social capital.
Yeah.
It became a public measure of self-worth.
It became a primary driver of human behavior.
People started planning their actual physical lives, where they went on vacation, what they ate for lunch, what clothes they bought.
Based almost entirely on the anticipated yield of this digital currency.
It completely altered how we assign value to our own lived experiences.
What's fascinating here is the underlying psychology of why it worked so well.
The introduction of the like button, and specifically the notification badge.
That little red bubble with a white number in it?
Exactly. It effectively gamified human validation.
It utilized a psychological concept known as intermittent variable rewards.
Which is the exact same behavioral mechanism used in slot machines.
You pull the lever, or in this case, you post a photo, and you don't know if you're going to get a massive payout of social validation.
Or nothing at all.
That uncertainty creates a powerful dopamine loop in the brain.
It compels you to keep checking, keep opening the app, keep pulling the lever.
And it wasn't just social media that was being gamified and optimized to hijack our attention.
It was our entire media and entertainment ecosystem.
If you look at the shift in how we consumed culture, the 2010s is the decade streaming completely swallowed traditional media.
By 2019, streaming accounted for nearly 80% of all recorded music revenue.
And in television, we moved away from the era of the schedule.
Right, the era where a show aired at 8:00 p.m. on Thursday.
The entire country watched it at the same time, and then we all talked about it at the water cooler on Friday.
There was a week-long cooling-off period where society digested the narrative together.
Exactly. We moved from that shared scheduled experience to the era of the feed and the binge.
And binge watching didn't just alter how we consume stories.
It physically altered the writers' rooms in Hollywood and how stories were constructed.
Everything had to end on a cliffhanger. There could be no narrative resolution at the end of an episode.
Because the platform needed to automatically trigger the 5-second countdown to the next episode before you had a chance to think about turning off the television.
Our entire media ecosystem, from a 10-second social post to a 10-hour prestige television drama, was fundamentally redesigned.
To eliminate friction and prevent you from looking away.
Okay, here's a mechanical metaphor. Tell me if this works.
Let's hear it.
The algorithm wasn't a funhouse mirror that just distorted reality. It was a thermostat for friction.
But instead of adjusting for room temperature, it was adjusting for your emotional temperature.
Every time you slowed your scroll, it noted what specific emotion made you pause.
And it turned up the heat on that exact feeling.
But I have a massive question about intentionality here.
Okay.
Did the tech companies actually know they were fundamentally rewiring human psychology?
Like, did a bunch of software engineers sit in a conference room in Silicon Valley and say, let's fracture shared reality, exploit dopamine loops, and induce global anxiety?
Or were they simply trying to sell more digital ad space and accidentally broke human attention in the process?
That is the multi-trillion-dollar question of our time.
And to answer it, we have to look through the lens of another subpersonality from the analysis. Tira.
Tira represents the skeptic, the deep analytical observer.
The part of us that senses an impending epistemic crisis, a crisis of how we know what is true.
Through the Tira lens, we see that the algorithms themselves do not possess malice.
Code does not have morals.
It doesn't care about truth, and it doesn't care about societal destruction.
It only cares about the single metric its creators programmed it to maximize: engagement, time on device.
The tech companies almost certainly did not set out with the intention to break human attention or polarize the globe.
They were building advertising engines.
But here is the critical pivot. Once they realized, through mountains of user data, that anger, moral outrage, tribalism, and extreme content generated the highest possible engagement metrics.
They didn't turn the machines off.
They didn't recalibrate them for societal health. They optimized them further.
The consequence, whether it started as intentional or accidental, was the systematic, structural retraining of human attention spans.
We were actively conditioned, Pavlovian style, to expect constant, highly fragmented, emotionally charged stimulation.
And as a result, we began to lose the cognitive capacity to sit with boredom, read deeply, or process nuance.
Wow. And when you take a society that has lost the capacity for nuance and you give them all personalized outrage machines,
The real world gets very messy very quickly.
which brings us to the geopolitical and political reality of the decade.
We are moving from the invisible technological infrastructure into how that exact infrastructure warped the physical world.
And ultimately, the death of shared truth.
The overarching analysis here is that the 2010s essentially optimized political and social division.
It transformed politics from a periodic civic duty, something you casually thought about every couple of years when you went to a polling place,
Into a persistent, daily, relentless, inescapable identity war.
and this was happening against a backdrop of massive, terrifying global instability.
Yes, if we connect this to the bigger picture, the macro geopolitical landscape of the 2010s is one of a rapidly shifting, highly volatile power dynamic.
The United States was technically recovering from the Great Recession, but global power was heavily diffusing.
We moved decisively into a multipolar world. You have the sheer, unprecedented scale of China's economic, technological, and strategic rise.
Which became the central reality of global trade.
You have Russia acting as a profound, aggressive, destabilizing force, most notably with the 2014 annexation of Crimea,
That event was a massive shock.
because it aggressively signaled that the post-Cold War rules of territorial integrity were no longer universally accepted or enforceable.
And then, crucially for the narrative of how technology intersects with society, you have the Middle East.
Right, the Arab Spring, spanning from late 2010 through 2011.
The Arab Spring is the perfect case study of this technological shift.
Initially, it was viewed almost exclusively through that highly optimistic Tommy lens.
The idea of social media facilitating pro-democracy uprisings. People called them the Twitter revolutions.
And it's true, the platforms were incredible tools for organizing massive crowds instantaneously.
But the mechanism of networked unrest rapidly showcased its dark side.
It became clear that social media is incredibly effective at tearing down existing institutions.
But it provides absolutely zero infrastructure for governing or building new ones.
It toppled regimes, but the resulting power vacuums fed into horrific, protracted civil wars.
Devastating proxy struggles and the catastrophic rise of ISIS.
And ISIS itself became a dark, twisted symbol of internet-age extremism.
They weren't just a physical terror group. They were a highly sophisticated digital media production company.
Weaponizing the exact same Western social media platforms to globally broadcast high-definition terror and recruit disaffected youth from around the world.
And overarching all of this geopolitical tension was the growing, undeniable existential reality of climate change.
Culminating in the 2015 Paris Agreement.
Climate anxiety fully transitioned from a theoretical future problem to a present tense, politically weaponized moral crisis.
So the global stage is incredibly tense, the stakes feel existential, and everyone is watching it unfold on devices designed to make them anxious.
And then we zoom in on the U.S. political climate.
Now, we are going to look at this exactly as the analysis lays it out, focusing on the media environment and the emotional resonance of the era.
The 2010s in the U.S. were defined by two presidencies that were stylistically, emotionally, rhetorically, and fundamentally complete opposites.
The Obama presidency and the Trump presidency.
When you look at the historical timeline, the Obama years were largely defined by the politics of economic recovery.
An intentional projection of technocratic calm and significant systemic policy fights over domestic structure.
You have major legislative landmarks like the Affordable Care Act in 2010, which entirely reshaped healthcare access and the political discourse surrounding it.
You have executive actions like DACA in 2012, providing temporary protections for certain undocumented youth.
And socially, you see a massive, rapid cultural shift culminating in the 2015 Supreme Court decision, Obergefell v. Hodges.
Which expanded same-sex marriage nationwide.
And then, pivoting off that era, the Trump presidency arrives.
Which the analysis frames as a period of intensifying nationalism, a harnessing of deep anti-establishment anger.
And the ushering in of a much more openly combative, chaotic media environment.
Where we see major economic and policy shifts like Tax Cuts and Jobs Act.
But the key insight here regarding the 2016 election, the thing that really connects to our digital rewiring theme, isn't just that it was a highly divisive election.
It's that the 2016 election didn't necessarily create the division out of thin air.
It exposed with brutal clarity how deeply divided people already were.
It was the moment those algorithmic reality tunnels we talked about finally crashed into the physical ballot box.
It was the moment we realized we were no longer operating with a shared set of facts.
Consequently, institutional trust, trust in legacy media, trust in the government, trust in the electoral process itself, plummeted to historic, unprecedented lows.
It was the culmination of a decade where identity was forced to the absolute center of public life.
And the technology was the primary accelerant. Think about the social and cultural identity movements of the decade.
The sudden, ubiquitous proliferation of high-definition smartphone cameras meant that incidents of police violence and racial inequity were no longer just localized stories.
Or abstract statistics debated in city halls.
They were visceral, unedited, viral videos that were impossible to ignore, popping up in everyone's feed.
This fundamentally fueled mass, decentralized movements like Black Lives Matter.
Everything previously hidden became visible.
Gender norms and the understanding of identity shifted rapidly in the public discourse.
Family structures were openly negotiated and redefined online.
Identity wasn't just who you were in the quiet privacy of your own life anymore.
It became a mandatory public declaration required by the architecture of the digital environment.
So if everyone is suddenly trapped in these personalized, algorithmic reality tunnels, constantly forced to declare their identity,
How does that actually play out when those people have to step outside and participate in society?
because you can't have a shared democracy without shared facts.
Which brings up a massive paradox that I want you to analyze.
Alrighty.
If we as a species had access to more information in the 2010s than any humans in the entire history of the world.
Literally the sum of human knowledge in our pockets.
Right. Why did we end up feeling less certain about what was actually true? How does having more information lead to an epistemic collapse?
This raises an important question, perhaps the most important question of the era. It is the defining paradox of the information age.
And the framework of the subpersonalities beautifully unpacks the mechanics of it.
Specifically through the clash between Kenny and Tyra.
Remember, Kenny is the tribal protector.
Kenny's instinct, honed over millennia of human evolution, is loyalty, moral defensiveness, and protecting the in-group from perceived threats.
Tyra is the observer. The part of us that recognizes truth is becoming hopelessly fragmented.
When you have a society where information no longer comes exclusively from traditional, standardized gatekeepers,
Like scheduled evening news broadcasts or established, heavily edited newspapers.
but instead flows relentlessly from algorithms, partisan influencers, emotionally charged friends, and anonymous bot accounts.
You have to ask what spreads fastest in that ecosystem.
It is not the nuanced, heavily fact-checked, 40-page white paper.
What spreads fastest, what the algorithm actively accelerates, is what is simple.
What is highly emotional and what strongly validates the tribal instincts of Kenny.
It's the outrage loop. It hacks our evolutionary biology.
If an article makes me furious at the other side, I share it to warn my tribe.
Precisely. And in that environment, the very concept of truth shifted.
It moved from being an objective, shared baseline, something we could all point to and agree on, even if we disagreed on the policy,
To something that is interpretive, personalized, and deeply tied to identity.
if truth is simply whatever goes viral within your specific, curated reality tunnel, then objective facts lose their anchoring power.
A falsehood that confirms your worldview feels more true than a fact that challenges it.
And what's fascinating here is how the analysis explicitly notes that the 2010s didn't invent human political division.
We are a tribal species. We have always had factions, civil wars, and deep ideological divides.
But the 2010s optimized it.
The digital platforms provided the perfect, frictionless, globally scaled environment for our worst, most defensive tribal instincts to flourish instantaneously.
Optimized division, that phrase is chilling.
And it perfectly transitions us from the macro to the micro because this optimization didn't just affect how we vote.
It deeply affected how we live.
Now, the public square is fractured, but what about the private self? Let's look at the performance of self, the economy, class, and curated lives.
The core concept here is the total normalization of a split identity.
Over the 2010s, we essentially all started living two parallel lives. Who you actually are in the messy, exhausting, real world.
Versus who you appear to be on the polished, highly edited digital stage.
And this split was incredibly stark when you look at the economics of the decade.
The contrast between the macroeconomic data printed in the financial sections and the lived daily experience of the average person is profound.
On paper, if you just look at the charts, the 2010s look like a massive, unmitigated success story of economic recovery.
Unemployment dropped from the catastrophic, terrifying highs of the Great Recession all the way down to a historically low 3.5% by late 2019.
The median household income steadily rose, hitting around $68,700 by 2019.
The stock market experienced a historic, seemingly unstoppable bull run. The official numbers look fantastic.
But the aesthetic reality, the actual lived reality on the ground, was defined by immense, silent, crushing pressure.
This was the decade that birthed the gig economy.
It was the decade of paralyzing generational student debt that delayed homeownership and family formation.
It was a decade where housing affordability in major metropolitan areas completely detached from average salaries.
The macro numbers were robust, but the micro experience was defined by extreme precariousness.
To really grasp this, we need to move past the statistics and dive into the day-in-the-life profiles the analysis provides.
Because when we say unemployment was 3.5%, what that actually meant for you depended entirely on your class.
It wasn't one shared economy.
Let's look at a day in the life of the middle class around, say, 2016.
You wake up, and the very first thing you do, before your feet even touch the floor, before you say good morning to your partner,
Is grab your phone from the nightstand to check notifications and emails.
you drive to a salaried job, it pays the bills, it feels stable enough.
But you are acutely aware deep down that you are entirely replaceable.
Lunch is a 15-minute, $12 Chipotle burrito eaten while staring at a spreadsheet at your desk.
But the defining feature of your job, the thing that separates the 2010s from the 1990s, is that you are now reachable 250/7.
Email and Slack are installed on your personal phone.
Your boss can text you at 9 p.m. on a Sunday, and you are expected to answer.
The boundary between the office and the home has been completely, irreversibly dissolved.
You aren't poor, but you are constantly doing background mental math about the cost of childcare, rising rent, and paying down those student loans.
And then compare that to the upper middle class experience, say around 2018.
This is a life defined almost entirely by the concept of optimization.
You are likely working in tech, upper management, or specialized medicine.
You use an endless array of apps to outsource all the physical friction of daily life.
You order pre-portioned meal kits like Blue Apron so you never have to walk through a grocery store.
You take Ubers everywhere. Your home thermostat locks and lights are synced to the cloud.
Your anxiety isn't about immediate physical survival or making next month's rent.
Your anxiety is entirely about status maintenance.
It's an exhausting treadmill. It's about getting your kids into the exact right enrichment programs.
Managing intense white-collar career burnout.
And ensuring you are perfectly positioned for whatever the future holds.
You are highly successful by every traditional metric, but you are bone-tired from the relentless performance of that success.
And then we have to look at the working class, or struggling reality, peaking around 2019.
The news is telling you the economy is roaring, but your life is defined by unpredictable shift work.
Physical labor, or patching together 3 different gig economy jobs just to stay afloat.
You're driving for Uber, delivering groceries for Instacart, and working a retail shift.
For you, the smartphone is absolutely not a luxury, and it's not a toy.
It is a vital, non-negotiable survival tool.
It is your bank, it is your job board, it is the algorithmic boss dictating your delivery routes.
And it is your only cheap form of entertainment at the end of a 14-hour day.
You are surviving on dollar menus or discount groceries.
And the psychological weight of this class is the knowledge that one broken-down car transmission
Or one unexpected emergency room bill will entirely catastrophically derail your month.
The world is constantly demanding more energy, more hustle, and more permanent availability from you while returning very little actual structural security.
And the brilliant insight of this analysis is recognizing what ties all 3 of these vastly different economic realities together.
It is what the author calls the burden of visibility.
Regardless of your class, regardless of your bank account, you are operating in a culture that relentlessly demands you present an Instagrammable life.
It's the era of the perfectly lit avocado toast,
The meticulously staged third-wave coffee cup next to a MacBook.
the impeccably curated, color-corrected vacation photos.
Everyone, across all classes, is projecting an aesthetic of effortless success, beauty, and leisure.
Right alongside a massive, heavily documented, very real rise in clinical burnout, severe anxiety, and delayed adulthood.
The gap between what human life actually felt like on the inside and what human life looked like on a screen had never been wider in the history of our species.
Okay, I have to challenge this because this performative aspect of the decade drives me crazy.
All right, what's the challenge?
We essentially all became our own PR managers, right? Constantly curating our personal brands, managing our image, doing damage control.
It certainly felt like a full-time job.
Did this performative culture actually turn an entire generation into massive, self-obsessed narcissists?
Or
Or were we simply terrified of becoming invisible in a new digital economic system that exclusively financially rewarded attention. Was it vanity or was it survival?
It was absolutely survival masked as vanity.
Wow.
And to truly understand this dynamic, we look at the final two subpersonalities, Liz and Kelly.
Liz, as we discussed, represents the branding instinct.
It is the cold, calculated understanding that in an attention-based economy, visibility is literal power.
If you aren't visible, if you don't have a presence, you don't get the freelance job.
You don't get the day on Hinge. You don't get the social standing in your peer group.
Liz masters the presentation. Liz knows which filter makes you look best.
But Kelly represents our core empathy, our vulnerability, and our quiet, secret loneliness.
Kelly is the part of us that feels the agonizing, painful gap between the polished digital image we project and the messy reality we live.
Social media rigorously, algorithmically rewards highlights, aesthetic perfection, and absolute unwavering certainty.
But real human life is incredibly messy.
It is full of self-doubt, inconsistency, physical illness, and quiet struggle.
When you force a messy, complicated human being to constantly perform a certainty and perfection for an invisible, judgmental audience of hundreds or thousands of people,
You create a society that is simultaneously more visible than ever before and deeply, profoundly insecure.
visible and insecure, that hits incredibly hard.
Because Kelly is that exact feeling you get when you see a friend's perfectly curated, sun-drenched vacation photo.
But you know for a fact they were crying in the hotel room 10 minutes earlier about their marriage.
And that tension leads us to the final, incredibly empathetic section of this analysis, the 4 ages of the 2010s.
The core concept here is that there wasn't one monolithic 2010s experience. You can't just generalize the decade.
It was actually 4 completely different psychological worlds happening simultaneously.
Completely dependent on what life stage you were in when the smartphone took over.
Yes, the psychological impact of the digital environment varied drastically depending on the developmental stage of the brain experiencing it.
Let's start with the child, roughly ages 5 to 12 during the decade.
For them, the operating system of the world is fun and always on.
These are the iPad babies, the true first-generation digital natives.
They have absolutely no memory of life before Wi-Fi or the concept of waiting for a scheduled TV show to air on Saturday morning.
Their reality is YouTube algorithms autoplaying unboxing videos.
And endless open-world games like Roblox and Minecraft.
Their digital creativity is seemingly limitless, but their attention is entirely externally guided by recommendation engines from the moment their prefrontal cortex begins forming.
They are the first generation to have their cognitive development co-piloted by artificial intelligence.
Then you have the teenager, ages 13 to 18, and the analysis makes it abundantly clear this is the group that was hit the hardest.
Their core experience, the voice in their head, is everyone can see me all the time.
They are the first humans in history to have to use public social media platforms as their primary infrastructure for identity development.
Think about being a teenager. It's already a biological nightmare of awkwardness, changing bodies, and social mistakes.
But for this group, their mistakes aren't forgotten by Monday morning. They are archived permanently on Snapchat or Instagram.
Their entire sense of self-confidence, their social hierarchy, is inextricably tied to quantified public metrics.
How many likes did my selfie get? What is my snap streak with my best friend? Did I get left on read?
It's a brutal, relentless 247 evaluation matrix during the absolute most vulnerable years of neurological development.
It is an unprecedented psychological crucible.
The metrics literally alter their brain chemistry.
Then you move to the adult, ages 20 to 50 during the decade. The millennial and Gen X tension.
Their internal monologue is, I'm supposed to have it together, but
Yeah.
something feels fundamentally off.
This group remembers the before times. They remember the analog world.
They were promised an analog social contract. You work hard, you get a college degree, you achieve middle-class stability.
Instead, they graduated into a post-recession economy, carrying massive, unforgivable student debt.
Trying to build careers in a hyper-competitive market that demanded 247 digital availability.
They are managing severe clinical burnout while desperately trying to project professional stability on LinkedIn and personal happiness on Facebook.
They are the transitional generation, caught between the analog promises of the 20th century and the brutal, frictionless realities of the 21st.
And finally, the elder, ages 50 and up. Their experience is one of profound disorientation.
The world changed faster than I expected.
They spent their entire lives, 4, 5, 6 decades, operating under clear social norms.
Shared national narratives delivered by Walter Cronkite or local papers and established information gatekeepers.
Suddenly, they are thrust into digital
Their
chaos.
authority and life experience are challenged by algorithms and anonymous commenters.
They are forced to adapt to smartphones and confusing interfaces just to stay in touch with their own grandchildren or pay their utility bills.
And as the analysis notes, for many in this group, nostalgia became a powerful, necessary coping mechanism.
But that nostalgia was also easily weaponized by political algorithms.
Targeting a demographic that simply didn't have the digital literacy to spot the manipulation, making a world that stopped making sense to them feel even more threatening.
And across all 4 of these vastly different ages, the analysis distills the psychological toll into 4 hidden burdens of the decade.
First, the burden of visibility. The exhausting, unending reality of always being potentially seen, recorded, and evaluated by the public.
Second, the burden of choice. The paradox that having infinite options for dating on Tinder, for entertainment on Netflix, for information on Google.
Actually leads to less certainty, less satisfaction, and more paralysis.
Third, the burden of comparison. The daily, toxic act of living your messy, behind-the-scenes life against the heavily curated, digitally altered highlight reels of everyone you know.
And finally, the burden of interpretation.
The exhausting, unrelenting task of constantly having to decide what is true in a fractured, algorithmically distorted media landscape.
So I have to ask you, the listener, right now, wherever you are, which of those 4 ages were you during the 2010s?
Were you the child, the teenager, the adult, or the elder?
Because looking at these 4 burdens, I can practically guarantee you felt the heavy weight of at least one of them.
And that leads me to push you on this as our expert.
Okay.
Looking at the massive spikes in teenage anxiety, the political fracturing of democracies, these incredibly heavy psychological burdens. Is it fair to say that the 2010s was ultimately a failed decade?
Did we just build a giant digital machine that fundamentally broke us?
Yeah, was it a failure?
It is deeply tempting to label it a failure because the negative externalities are so incredibly visible.
But the analysis explicitly pushes back on that kind of binary thinking.
It argues that the 2010s was neither the best decade nor the worst decade in human history. It was a turning point.
It was a massive, clumsy, painful evolutionary leap in human infrastructure.
We successfully solved global communication. We solved instant information access.
We solved the frictionless distribution of ideas across borders.
But what we completely failed to solve was the human element within that new infrastructure.
We failed to solve how to maintain genuine belonging.
How to foster trust without physical proximity.
And how to agree on interpretation when everyone suddenly has a global megaphone.
We successfully built the neural network of the planet, but we didn't write the moral or psychological code for how a human being is supposed to live inside it without going crazy.
So what does this all mean? We've covered a staggering amount of ground today.
We've watched the internet evolve from a desk-bound destination you visit to the very reality you inhabit.
We've seen exactly how algorithms quietly hijacked our biological attention spans and optimized our political and social divisions for profit.
We've explored how objective truth became deeply contested.
How connection scaled massively while genuine meaning lagged behind, and how we all learned to perform our lives for an invisible, judgmental audience.
Yes. And as we transition out of the 2010s and hand the baton to the 2020s, the analysis describes the legacy of this decade as a combustible inheritance.
The 2010s normalized a life lived entirely through digital platforms.
It deepened our partisan identities to the level of primal, tribal warfare.
It fundamentally, perhaps permanently, weakened our shared trust in legacy institutions.
Whether that's the media, the government, the scientific community, or even just each other.
We are carrying forward intense hyperconnectivity, profound climate anxiety.
And the exhausting baseline expectation that absolutely every single human event must be instantly mediated, recorded, posted, and publicly interpreted.
The 2010s didn't just connect the world, it exposed the world to itself in all its chaotic, messy, uncurated, terrifying reality.
Which leaves us standing directly on the precipice of whatever comes next.
And I want to leave you, the listener, with a final provocative thought to mull over.
We've spent this entire time talking about how the 2010s was the decade where relatively simple algorithms learned how to hijack our attention,
Curate our reality and force us to perform for each other to earn digital validation.
So what happens in the future?
What happens in the late 2020s when artificial intelligence doesn't just passively curate the content we see, but actively starts generating the content?
What happens when AI starts generating the friends, the connections, and the very validation we are so desperately seeking?
If the 2010s made us perform for each other, will the next era make us perform for machines?
That is the exact, terrifying, and fascinating question we are hurtling toward.
Thank you so much for joining us on this deep dive. It's been a heavy one, but a necessary one.
As you go about the rest of your day, I encourage you to just look at your phone. Really look at it.
Hold it in your hand and ask yourself, am I using this tool? Or is this the environment I live in?
Think about that smart house we talked about at the very beginning.
The one that learns your triggers, the one that subtly shifts its walls, the one that watches you while you sleep.
Take a look around. You're already living in it.
We'll see you next time.